Welcome back to another episode of Sabres vs. the Atlantic. In this series that we have been doing in the lead up to the 24-25 NHL season, we have been pitting the Sabres up against their Atlantic Division foes, comparing their lineups, taking a look at some of the other teams' storylines heading into the seasons, who they added in the offseason, who they lost, and deciding once and for all who comes out on top in the upcoming NHL season. As always, my name is Jonah.
I'm Christian.
And I'm JP.
Welcome back, JP. I thought Habs fans took you out. We haven't seen you since the Montreal episode. I thought they got you.
Yeah, we were going through some stuff, but I got through it.
It has been a minute.
It has been. It has been. Jesse filled in for you last week. Did an admirable job, but as you can see, JP has ripped the mic out of Jesse's hands and put it back into his own.
That's not true. He could have had my spot tonight. I offered it. I know he does not like Florida, so he could have had my spot tonight.
That's true. When we were talking, he said it would be taking every chance he could to rain on their parade, their Stanley Cup parade, that is, because, as JP alluded to, we are concluding this series today, and our final team, saving the best for last, the actual best for last, the Florida Panthers, your 2024 Stanley Cup champions. God, still feels weird to say. Think about where that franchise was a decade ago.
Think about where that franchise was for 25 years of its existence. It was completely irrelevant.
Even like pre-Kachuk trade, they had that historic season, won the President's Trophy, and then got swept by Tampa Bay, and everybody thought that was it. And then they probably make one of the ballsiest trades in NHL history, send out their franchise winger for another franchise winger, and here we are today. Ended up getting them their first Stanley Cup in franchise history. But that's in the past. Let's look ahead to the future. With every Stanley Cup, inevitably, comes the cup tax. When you win cups, guys want more money. And the Florida Panthers, they had quite a few free agents. They knew that this was probably their best chance at a Stanley Cup. They went all in, picked up some rentals during the season, and a few of them had to leave, and a few of their players that had been around for a few seasons had to leave. So are they really still that far away from the Sabres? Because obviously one team won the Stanley Cup, the other did not even qualify for the Stanley Cup playoffs. So you might even be asking the question, how is this a conversation? But I do think it's still interesting to talk about. The Panthers did have some interesting departures from their rosters, so I think this is a more interesting conversation than one might think. So just to recap, the Florida Panthers went 52-24-6, 110 points. I believe they won the Atlantic Division in the very last game or last two games of the regular season. They stole it from the Boston Bruins, and obviously, in the Stanley Cup playoffs, basically just trucking their way through, although they nearly did have the biggest choke job in modern NHL history, but prevailed in Game 7. We can talk about more of their roster and their storylines as we get into it, so why don't we get into some of their key departures and key additions? So, why don't we start with their biggest departure of all, Brandon Montour, the former Buffalo Sabre, went on to lift the Stanley Cup. Does that sound familiar? Yes, it very much does. But he left the Panthers, got his big payday in Seattle. I believe he signed like a 7x7.1. I think he got something along the lines of the Tage Thompson contract. So Florida had a choice between him and Sam Reinhart, and obviously they chose Sam Reinhart. And looking back on it, it was quite the pickup. They only got him for a third-round pick from the Sabres.
The rich get richer. What could you say? I mean, when you have a floundering franchise, you don't have much leverage when you're making trades, do you?
Well, he wasn't good with us. He wasn't a good player.
Turning the knife. Do you guys remember the week he got traded? I think it was when the Sabres broke the losing streak, and he set NHL history because he had two shorthanded goals, I think, in the same game. And I just remember being so excited, like, yes, his value is being boosted. And I remember being happy with a third round pick as a return because he was just so misutilized under Ralph Kruger, but doesn't look too great looking back on it. Another big top four departure for them was Oliver Ekman Larsson, who, after quite a rough few seasons in Vancouver, really revitalized his career, similar to Brandon Montour in the Florida top four, and he would leave and head over to the Toronto Maple Leafs. So, right off the bat, two key pieces of their top four. I mean, Ekman Larsson, I want to say he was quarterbacking their first power play unit in the Cup Finals. Um, and as you'll see in their additions, they really didn't have a replacement lined up for those two. So when we get into the lineups, that'll be an interesting talking point. They also lost Anthony Stolars, who put up some of the best advanced numbers in the league last season in a backup role behind Sergei Bobrovsky. Vladimir Tarasenko, who they picked up at the trade deadline, he went to free agency as well and landed in Detroit. Ryan Lomberg in their bottom six, he went to Calgary. Nick Cousins, he stayed in the division, went to Ottawa. Kevin Stenlund, he went to Utah. And then, as we saw this past week, Kyle Okposo heads to retirement.
Not surprised about the last one. I
I was
mean,
surprised it took so long.
yeah, yeah. I don't know. I don't know. Was he thinking it over? I mean, you're almost 40. It's like you're not your best years are definitely behind you at that point. But yeah, the Sabres paid him almost $15 million to not win the cup with them, you know?
I was
It
gonna
only took
say he was waiting for that annual Sabres won by 2.5 to come his way.
6 games with the Panthers. All it took for him to win the cup. 6 games. He was with us for 7 years.
I think that was regular season games.
Yeah, I know.
Still though,
I was wondering if you were going to put him in the key departures. I was getting a little
you have
worried.
to.
Key
Well, you
departure.
had to. I was
But
just worried you weren't.
oh, of course. But I mean, they talked about him. I mean, he was, every Cup final has that old guy that hasn't won the Stanley Cup, and it was him. It was him this time around. He got the happy ending. So.
Right. No, no emphasis on key departure. It's definitely key for him to depart that roster. Definitely made him better.
All right.
I'm
Into
sorry,
their
I'm
addition.
salty.
So, since Florida is obviously up against the cap these days, they're really just trimming the edges of their roster, or at least trying to replace the fringes of their roster. They picked up both of the Bachquist brothers, Jesper Bachquist, who will play a key role in their bottom six. Adam Bachquist, who's looking to rebound from his time in Columbus, he'll look to break into that defensive lineup. Thomas Nosek also helping out their bottom six, and then Nate Schmidt with their defense group. And then finally, Chris Drieger, who will be looking to break into the backup role behind Sergei Bobrovsky. So, with those out of the way, why don't we just jump right into the key storylines? All right, so avert your eyes from the player picture right there. For any of our YouTube listeners, you can see that Kyle Okposo hoisting the Stanley Cup is displayed on the screen. So you can see Christian, he's closing his eyes right now. First key storyline, I alluded to it in the key departures. Can this defense survive the losses dealt by free agency? Brandon Montour and OEL both gone. Those were anchors of their first and second pairs, and they really didn't have a real replacement for them. They locked up Gustav Forsling this offseason, and Aaron Ekblad's obviously looking to stay healthy this year. So those are going to be the two they rely upon. But unless they kind of do a Brandon Montour-esque career revival with Adam Bachquist, I don't know if it's going to be interesting to see how Paul Maurice kind of deals with this shuffling of their lineup.
Yeah, those are some big losses, especially think about the power play. We had Montour and Larson. I mean, they're, head pointing the power plays. Like it'll be interesting to see how their power play even works out after that.
Yeah, I definitely think this decor is worse than last year. I mean,
That's a
I'm a
bold statement.
I'm a big OEL fan. And obviously Brandon Montour, we know his pedigree and how misutilized he was here in Buffalo. But I think this roster will, at least this decor, it'll take a little bit of a step back. But I still think they just got so much firepower up front. It's like, good teams, they what's the word I'm looking for?
Figure it out.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. The good teams figure it out. I was gonna say
What would
something
we
more
do
along
without
the
you,
lines of
JP?
like I was gonna say something more along the lines of, they like malleate themselves to the situation. Is that a word?
I have no
Evaluate?
idea. That's a big word.
What the hell?
Like something that's malleable, something that'll like, it'll
We're recording later than usual,
oh
folks.
God.
Christian is
He's
just, he should be in bed right now, honestly.
It is way past my bedtime.
The only thing I will close this point with is that just remember they do have the sixth best defenseman in the NHL, Gustav Forsling, to carry that group.
Oh my God.
So I think they'll probably be all right. Secondly, how does Sam Reinhart follow up his career season? Now, gotta remember, just in case you've forgotten, he had 57 goals in the regular season last year, 94 points, and then he got his big payday in the offseason, 8 years, $8.625 million per season. Honestly, it came in lower than it should have, considering what like William Nylander got on his latest deal. There's state taxes and whatnot that have been a big focal point, but still, that's a good deal for him, but also still a big deal. How is he going to follow that up, and how will, committing to him was that the right choice over committing to like Brandon Montour? Christian said they're so loaded up front where they may be better served to let Reinhardt go and keep a Montour or keep a Ekman Larson. So I'm interested to see how he follows up that season and if that financial commitment was worth it. Although I do love me some Sam Reinhart, and I probably would have made the same call in the same situation.
Yeah, you understand the kind of backlash that organization would have gotten if they just let Sam Reinhart walk out the door. They were giving him everything.
Mr. Game
50,
7.
yeah, and also a almost 60 goal scorer doesn't just, show up at your door every other year. That's the type of player you got to pay. Defense be damned.
And finally, looking at their roster overall, is a Stanley Cup hangover possible? It is important to remember they've gone to the last two Cup finals. Those are deep playoff runs into June. It takes a physical toll on these guys' bodies. It's a short summer. Is roster subtractions be damned? Let alone just the overall everything they've been through. Is a Stanley Cup hangover legitimately possible? And if the answer is yes, then how much of a hangover is it? Is it a first round exit? Do they somehow miss the playoffs? If it's possible, probably not. But is that in their forecast potentially? So why don't we? Let's not waste any time and just rip off the Band-Aid. Let's look at these two teams' lineups side by side. All right, so as always, both of these teams' lineups are courtesy of the Daily Faceoff. Although I did, since hockey is finally back, I did make some adjustments to the Sabres lineup to reflect what they've been rolling out in the past few preseason games and at practice. So, on the Sabres side of things, your top line, as always, Peterka, Thompson, Tuck. Second line, Benson, Cousins, Quinn. Third line, Zucker, McLeod, Greenway. Fourth line, Malenstein, Lafferty, Aube, Kubel. On defense, Dahlin and Yoki Haru are on the first pair. Power and Byram, second pair. Samuelson, Clifton, third pair. And then in net, you have Luukkonen and Levi, with your extras being Krebs, Bryson, and Reimer. Moving over to Florida, your first line, Verhaeghe, Barkov, Reinhardt. Second line, Kachuk, Bennett, Rodriguez. Third line, Lusterinen, Lundell, Samoskevich. Fourth line, Jesper Bachvist with Nosek and Greer. On defense, Forsling with Ekblad, Kulikov with Mikula, Schmidt with Bachvist, Bobrovsky and Knight in net with Gadovic, Bjornfoot, and Balinskis as your extras. So, I think as anybody listening, and I'm sure even the final runtime would indicate, we're whipping through this episode because there is not really much to say here in terms of like at least every other team. There is something to really that could realistically put the Sabres ahead of them, even if it's very unlikely if it's a team like Boston or Toronto. But here, I mean, there's no debate in the forward group. And I would say even in net, just given what Bobrovsky has done the past 2 seasons, there's almost no point in wasting time on comparing those two groups. Literally, the only thing that I think the Sabres do potentially have an edge in is defense. You know, no Oliver Ekman-Larsson and no Brandon Montour in that defense group. I think the Sabres look better on paper. But even then, it's like, Paul Maurice is such a good coach, and they've revitalized so many careers at that point. I mean, Montour went in, became a beast. OEL went in, became a beast. Kulikov was good for them last season, even Mikkola, and we've seen what Forsling has prospered into. So it's almost like, yeah, it looks better on the Sabres look better on paper, but I mean, geez, who's the next Montour or OEL for that team at this point?
Yeah, I think we're downplaying their loss of their fourth line forward, Kyle Poso. Because especially, I mean, we might have the best fourth line in the league right now with Malenstein, Lafferty, and Albe Kubel. So, um, don't look past that. But yeah, I mean, I think our defense is better. It definitely has at least more potential. Hopefully Byram, actually turns out. I think he's looked pretty good in the preseason, and Dowling and Power can, continue their good play. I mean, I think we obviously have the better good defense. But I mean, who knows? They're still Florida. If their forwards can carry most of the load, then, defense doesn't have to do as much. And they got Bobrovsky to make their defense look even better. So it'll be interesting. But yeah, I mean, that lineup is just miles ahead of us.
Yeah, that's a good point. Bobrovsky, even if they have defensive warts, he will probably do more than enough to cover up for them. And if Spencer Knight is their backup this season, who knows? Maybe he breaks out and they have the best tandem in hockey and just continue to
Oh God.
just continue to dominate the Atlantic.
For any fan out there who keeps up with NHL news, the Panthers lost two former Sabres to free agency and retirement. But don't worry, they have three more of them on their roster right now. So thank God for that. But yeah, I completely agree. Like I can't even make my bottom six argument if you've listened to previous episodes, how they have a great identity, which I still believe they do. It just doesn't stack up with this team. I mean, coming off of a deep playoff run, all these guys are household names, except maybe like I don't know, Nosek and Greer. Um, but and in net, Bobrovsky and Knight. Bobrovsky had probably arguably one of the best bounce back years a goalie's had in a long time, finally living up to that contract he got. And yeah, I guess Jonah, I like your argument for the better defense on paper. Um, you don't get better losing a Brandon Montour or a OEL, and I guess maybe Darlene and Power could, push us over the top in that category, but overall we got some work to do if we want our lineup to look like theirs in the next like year or two.
I mean, realistically, the only way that we would, at least compete with them, not even say be better, Reinhardt would have to take a massive step back, and the rest of the lineup would just have to have a massive cup hangover. Um, I mean, which isn't completely out of the realm of possibility. Reinhardt is not going to score 57 goals again. You write this down. He's not going to do it. So, the with him, maybe not producing as much, the rest of the lineup could take a hit, but they're still going to be one of the top teams in the league.
Yeah, I mean that's a grounded take, but then I look over and Matt Tkachuk was on their second line, so
Yeah.
at that point it's kind of like, they really flexing their muscles here. Oh well, let's start to collect our thoughts here and wrap this series up. All right, so I won't beat around the bush with this one. Um, we don't even have to give our final thoughts and who we think comes out on top. I think the more interesting question here is, does Florida win the division again? Do you think that they once again come out on top?
I mean, they barely won it last year. Like I think if they do take a small step back this year, like I think they will, I think they could easily finish in second or third. I have no idea who would finish ahead of them, but I think it's not crazy to think that they're not going to win a division.
I mean, just if you think about it, this division is so close. It seems like every single year. I really think we're due for some sort of, outlier team making a push. Whether
Cinderella,
We've been
whether
Sabres
due. We've
run.
been due for
not even
5 years,
not
man.
even saying it's us. I'm saying could be Detroit, could be
Don't
also
say it.
Detroit. Not no, can't go there. Also Detroit. Other two teams delusional. Not happening.
I mean, hey, you know how I think. I think Detroit's coming in last in this division. Um, if
That'd
not,
be funny.
probably still Montreal.
Yeah.
Better keep my eyes peeled for any Montreal fans that might have heard me say that.
After
But
complimenting their team for an hour straight.
A ton of hype around that team always.
I'm not ready for when that team becomes good again.
We can't let that happen.
Well, we'll be good too then. So
Yeah, hopefully,
One could
hopefully,
hope.
hopefully. I still think they come out on top. I just don't see Boston. I don't even know if the Swayman thing is going to get resolved before Toronto. I guess maybe they have one last push with this core, so maybe it could be them. I mean, they've never won the Atlantic, so you could argue they're due. Um, yeah, I think Tampa's days are done, and I don't see any of the other teams in the division rising up that much. So I think at the end of the day, it's between Florida and Toronto, and I will take Florida. So that's where I'm at. But I believe, other than that, that will wrap up this series. So thanks for following along. If you have, it seemed pretty well received, other than by the city of Montreal. So um, I had a good time doing it. I don't know about you guys.
yeah,
I
definitely make it an annual thing.
Yeah, JP, how many episodes were you in?
I think I was on for three of them, maybe four.
I had a great time doing this series. We got to do this again.
I don't know. We look at you, Christian. You look a lot more depressed than when we first started this series. Like you've come to a realization.
It's the nerves, man. It's like you start talking about other teams, you start gassing them up because you don't want to sound like a homer, and then you're just like, oh, is my team actually that good? And we haven't been good in so long. We're due. We're
That's
so
just
due.
that's just called good journalism,
Yeah,
good reporting. No bias, no
that's a good
bias
way of
here.
putting it.
Absolutely none.
It'll
None.
be even better next year. Once we're actually good and better than most of these teams, then we could actually just crap on them the whole time.
Yeah.
Knock on wood.
Once again, thank you very much for following along. If you have, I did have a good time doing this series and taking a deeper look at some of these teams. And obviously, it's a very interesting year for this division because, like we've said, every team is there. They are trying to be good. There's really not, you have your rebuilding teams, but nobody's bottoming out this year. At least I don't think so. It'll be interesting to see how it shakes out. I'm trying to think. I thought I had something else to say, but I don't believe I do. So if you guys have nothing else to say, thank you very much for listening. We will see you guys next time or next year, possibly. If you're an outside NHL fan, just looking for outsider's opinion on your team, then I guess we'll see you around next time. And as always, go Sabres.
Go Sabres.
Go Sabres.